Today's episode of the Our Hen House podcast is being sponsored by our partner, A Well-Fed World. A Well-Fed World is a hunger relief and animal protection organization chipping away at two of the world's most immense, unnecessary, and unconscionable forms of suffering. The suffering of people hungry from lack of food, and the suffering of animals used and abused for food. Mending our unjust food system is a critical part of solving the world's most destructive and persistent problems. Fortunately, the plant-based foods that promote health and well-being are the same foods that conserve resources to better feed the world, while reducing greenhouse gas emissions and protecting the environment. A well-fed world provides the means for change by empowering individuals, social justice organizations, and political decision-makers to embrace the benefits of plant-based foods and farming. Learn more at awfw.org.
Our hen house is a squawking house. Our hen house is their hen house. Our hen house, ooh, it's a funky fresh house. Our hen house is your hen house.
Welcome to Our Hen House. This is Marianne Sullivan. Thanks so much for joining us. We're excited about this week's show. My guest this week is Carter Dillard, who I've known a very long time. He's the Director of Litigation at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. But that's not what he's going to be talking about. Today, Carter is going to be wearing his other hat. And as long as I've known him, this has been a deep, deep passion for him. And he's going to be talking about his role at an organization called Having Kids. Carter has focused a great deal of the work he has done, of his research, of his energy, in examining the effects of human population on the world, including on animals. And he's thought really a lot about messaging and about how to take a child-friendly, people-friendly way of educating people, making it more comfortable for people to think about family size, and helping people think about what the perfect family size is for them. He is definitely not a top-down, everybody should be doing this my way kind of guy. He's really thoughtful. And I know this is a hugely hot-button issue for a lot of people, but I really encourage everyone to hear what he has to say. Think about your position on these issues if you haven't really thought them through, and think about what we can all do, whether we have children or not, because this is not an issue just for people who have kids or are thinking of having kids or who want to have kids. It's an issue for everybody. And we all want to work to make the world as safe as possible for all its living creatures, human and non. So I think you're really going to want to hear Carter's interview. And then Jasmine is going to be joined once again by Richie Bowie, who works alongside her as an associate editor at Veg News. And as you know, if you listened to last week's interview, Richie knows everything about what's going on in current trends in animal rights and veganism. And we're going to be giving you the second half of his interview on that. You know, if you work at Veg News, you're going to have an inside track on what's going on. And Richie had so much to say that we actually split his interview into two parts, and we're going to have the second half today. And speaking of what's going on in veganism and animal rights, or an issue that's very, very important to animal rights, I just got the chance this week to see a screener of the new movie Eating You Alive, which is now in distribution and has been screened at a number of places around the country and is available online. And I can't even imagine what it must be. You know, it's one of these movies about the health benefits of a plant-based whole foods diet. And I'm just thinking as I'm watching it, what it must be like to see one of these movies, and if you actually have one of these chronic diseases. I mean, how do you feel to have this revealed to you? I mean, people must just cry and just want to kill the doctors who they have seen who have never told them the truth about the importance of diet. And well, let me back up for a second. I'm kind of starting in the middle here. As you can imagine from the title, this is a film that is focused mostly on health issues, not exclusively. And it's talking about chronic disease, and mostly in America, but, it talks about some worldwide statistics and the impact that a plant-based whole foods diet can have in addressing all of those chronic diseases, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, etc., autoimmune diseases, and it's good. It's a long movie. It's packed full of information. It's mostly clips of interviews. They've taken these speakers and they or organize the information by topic. And lots of doctors are among the speakers that they interviews. There are a lot of the usual suspects who you've probably heard before: Michael Greger, Neil Barnard, T. Colin Campbell, Caldwell Esselstyn. But there are also a lot of doctors I had never heard of before, which is always reassuring. You don't always like to see all of the same people. And there are also patients telling stories, most of them, as we say, ordinary people. I'm sure they're not ordinary at all, but there are some famous ones as well. Samuel Jackson, who sadly, did not stay on the diet, which he talks about in the movie, and James Cameron and his wife, and Susie, what's his wife's name? Susie Amos Cameron, I think. And there's other folks, plenty of other folks telling unbelievably moving stories. So many people cry as they're telling their story. It's just, it rings completely and totally true. This is tragic stuff. And, people were dying. And the movie is, as I said, super health focused, but it also goes into what's happening to animals pretty effectively, and some environmental stuff that's kind of just slipped in there, which I think is fine because people are going to be watching this for the health information. But they used to totally leave those issues out, or sometimes in fearing that would actually put off people, that there were these additional benefits to the world and to the animals. So I really like that now they think that's an added attraction to the health message. So if you have people in your life with chronic diseases or people who are health conscious, I think this is a good activism tool to introduce them to some of these arguments. And obviously, even if, for yourself or other vegans who, just because we're vegan doesn't mean that we really know anything about nutrition or the health benefits of a vegan diet. Specifically a whole foods vegan diet. It's a great motivator to get people to stay with it. And if that's their mindset. And, too many people quit because of imaginary health issues. And this could help make them understand that they're truly imaginary, that all of this, they go on their vegan diet and either they don't do a good job at it, or they do a good job at it and they just get a cold or something and they attribute it to their diet. And then they stop. It drives me crazy. And so many people or they just say things like, I didn't feel that well. Well, if you wake up every morning thinking, how do I feel today? Is this making me weak? It might do something to your head. So many ridiculous reasons. So if people watch things like this, maybe it would help convince them that, they're making this up, or they're attributing things in false ways. And if they're going to stop being vegan, they're going to have to come up with some other excuse. So, obviously, this is information that I've heard a lot, and probably a lot of you have too, though maybe some of you haven't. And it's easy to get kind of just used to the fact of how unbelievably bad the food that people in this country, around the world now, eat. And, that includes, and actually is predominantly animal foods, but also processed foods. And we know this. And when you take a step back and you think about it, it's just mind-boggling. And one of the things that really struck me in this movie, and they didn't dwell on this for a long time, but they mentioned that modern medicine, which I tend to think of as the villain of, pushing pills on people instead of modifying their lifestyle. But it really is the reason that we know all of this now. Nutritional science used to be like basically a guessing game, and you had all these different crazy theories, and people just followed one guru or another. But now they can do all of these measurements of, all the plaque in your arteries and your blood sugar and all of these different tests that they can actually find out what food is doing to you. And this is it's not brand new for sure. They've been able to do tests like this for a while, but it's relatively new that we actually have real information and not just, some kind of bullshit that some doctors theorizing about what's good for you and what isn't, which, that could account for why nutritional theories used to be so completely wackadoodle. But, now we have plenty of wackadoodle theories, and we can actually do the science. And it still hasn't changed people's behavior. It could make you crazy. People are just completely immune to information. And, I do think that the science catches up with people, but it just takes such a long time. And even in matters, it's only when people are desperately ill that they tend to find out these things. Until they're desperately ill, even though we can really prove what's good for you and what's not good for you, people still don't take it in. And I was thinking it's a lot like the science about animals. Like, we know so much more about animals than we used to. And all right, people used to be horrible to animals, but they actually believed all these crazy cockamamie things about them. They didn't have science. They couldn't prove anything. So they just made up stuff. Now there's actually, science-based evidence about all of these incredible abilities and sentience and intelligence of animals, and people are still sticking to their old ways. It's hard to change hearts and minds. And, even the medical profession, when it coming back to the health issue, they have access to the science, and they don't teach students. They went through a lot of that stuff about how they don't teach students in medical school anything about nutrition, and apparently that is still the case. It's totally crazy. I don't know why I'm laughing, but it does make you wonder how many times we have to get this message out before people start to catch on. And this is when, their lives are at risk. It's pretty important stuff. And it just made me, one of the things that watching this reminded me of is just how much I love the people who are trying to bring truth to other people. And here they're trying, people are not motivated by greed here or by self-interest. The people who made this movie are not going to make a load of money. The doctors who are telling people what to eat are not going to make a load of money off of that. And there's so much passion and so much effort. I mean, this was, a lot of effort went into this movie. And in so many different ways, people are trying to get the message out there, and they just can't get other people to listen. They're actually trying to tell people, this is how you can help yourself. So no wonder it's so hard to get the message out about animals. I think we all need to just take a moment and pat ourselves on the back, and then we need to just keep going. It's just at some point, people are going to start to listen. At some point, we're not going to be putting in charge the worst people in the world. We're going to be putting in charge people who tell the truth, people who are trying to help, people who want the world to be a better place. At some point, that's going to happen. I swear it is. I swear. Really. I swear. All right. That brings us to our first guest, Carter Dillard, who actually is really a person who in so many different ways is trying to do good in the world. And as director of litigation for the Animal Legal Defense Fund, he has helped just really enormously increase, I think quadruple, the number of matters that the organization has filed. It has become a litigation machine. He's also worked in the past with Compassion Over Killing, with HSUS as their Director of Farm Animal Litigation, with the U.S. Department of Justice, and with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. So he has quite an interesting background. And today he's going to be talking about this organization, Having Kids. And talking about human population is truly a thankless task. Truly, no one thanks you for this. And maybe a few people do, but a lot of people really get their backs up about it. They don't think anybody should be talking about it. They think that you hate children or that you hate people. Oh, and, I do hate people, but Carter doesn't. And I don't hate any of you guys. In fact, when people talk about human population, they're probably exactly the opposite of either anti-human or anti-child. They're trying to make the world a better place. And Carter will be joining us to talk about his work in this area and why it is so important to animals right after this. Our Hen House is brought to you in part through the generosity of Herbivore. For 15 years, Herbivore has been working to make vegans look good. Declare your compassionate beliefs with a shirt, tank top, or hoodie. It's all at herbivoreclothing.com. From bags to jewelry to wallets to hats to a huge selection of books for vegan cooks and about living vegan, you are going to want it all. Lines like their original, "Eat like you give a damn," "Humane meat is yuppie bullshit," "Compassion is invincible," and my current personal fave, "A little veganism never hurt anybody." Ain't that the truth? Shop at Herbivore and wear your compassion on your back, or your front, or on your bag. Remember, compassion is invincible. Welcome to our hen house, Carter.
Thanks, Marianne.
It's such a pleasure to have you here today. We've talked to you before about a number of things, and today we're talking about something a little different, but something that, as long as I've known you, has been a deeply passionate issue for you, and also a deeply contentious issue. Whenever we talk about human population on our blog or on the podcast, people have very strong feelings about it. So before we get into all of the questions about your organization, having kids, can you just tell us, why is this about animals? I know it is, but really lay it out for people. Why is human overpopulation such a huge issue? And I don't even know whether you use that term, but such a huge issue for animals and people who care about them.
Sure. Well, I do want to back up and say that we think about family size and the decision to have children oftentimes in terms of population. But we can also think about it in terms of parenting, which is the cause of the effect of population. And I think that's the more logical way to step back and think about the cause. And it's relevant to animals because if you were an animal advocate living in the year 2100, based on our current rate of population growth and consumption taken on average worldwide, by 2100 we will have eradicated a massive amount of wildlife, increased the number of farmed animals that we are using, and probably increased the number of animals subject to research. Everything you can imagine that would happen in a limited space where our population is growing, and as a result, animals' populations are either decreasing, or where they're increasing, it's increasing their suffering. So if you were an advocate in 2100 and you had to come back to 2017 and choose one behavior to try to change, I would argue that you would probably want to change the way that people decide to have kids or to parent. And that in the long term, that is the most important human behavior when it comes to how animals' lives will be. And that, as you alluded to, it's hard sometimes for animal advocates to see that. One, because we have an immediacy bias, right? We look at things like animals in circuses or animals subject to horrible research methods happening today, and we want to do something about it. It's hard to think about something so abstract as how our behaviors magnify into 2100. And the second reason is, as you mentioned, we immediately in our minds frame the issue as one of population, and it becomes controversial. Because quite rightly, we have an intuitive response to the notion that there's such a thing as population control and how that would impact our lives. But I would argue, just as I'm arguing we should, as animal advocates, think about parenting. I'd also argue that if we think about it parenting and not population, we actually find that we have a lot of common shared ground, that it shouldn't be a scary or divisive issue. And then when it comes to the decision to have children, there are a lot of objective shared values at play that can get animal advocates, environmental advocates, and human rights advocates all on the same page towards reforms that will help both humans and animals. So that's why I think we focus on the issue, some of the resistance that we've had to focusing on it. But one solution is to think more about parenting.
Well, before I mean, that's what we're going to be talking about. But before we do, let me just back up again and talk a little bit about what you said, that this is the single most important issue that we can focus on. I think that probably most people who are listening to this podcast would guess that the single most important issue we can focus on is not so much to think about about parenting or children at all. It's to focus on what people are eating. Why would you say that's not the solution that we should? I mean, I know you think that's very important as well. So why do you put this first?
Sure. I mean, if you, even if the world were converted entirely to vegans, the amount of resources that those vegans would consume, aside from the animals that they'd left aside, would still destroy enough habitat to continue the mass extinction, or the sixth extinction as it's called, that's underway. And so it's hard to be an animal advocate and say, well, we're all vegan, but to eradicate other species, literally committing ecocide against them. So I think that diet alone would not solve the problem. And I think the other point is that while there has been a lot of success in moving towards plant-based diets, that trend doesn't compare to the successful trend of people having smaller families, right? From where we were really even in the middle of the 20th century to today, the parents are having half the number of children that they used to. That trend could be amplified to not only avoid the levels of extinction that we see from our growth today, but also to reduce the number of farmed animals that will be used in the future, because we're not going to convert everyone to be plant-based.
Yes, we are.
Well, if we, let's say contingent.
Put me in charge, Carter. Put me in charge.
If Marianne were in charge, you would be. But if she isn't in charge, then contingency, you won't be. So then you're concerned with the number of people. And the third point is, if we move from just pure numbers, which has been the problematic frame, to parenting, we might consider that when you're talking about convincing people of the rightness of not exploiting animals in your consumption, which is really veganism in a nutshell, right? It's boycotting the industries that use animals because we don't agree with what they do, that the decision to parent is a big part of that, because what will those future generations be consuming and why? And so if we can all agree that children should be taught sufficient empathy, that they might choose to consume in ways that don't harm animals, then really becoming plant-based people involves a lot of decision about our family making as well. So I think for those three reasons, I would still consider parenting the most influential behavior total on the lives of animals.
Now, I do really want to focus on your basic model, which I'm having a little trouble getting my head around, because it requires one to shift the way one looks at this. And I really want to explore that in detail. But again, before we get to that, I would just like to bring up this. I think the natural reaction of so many people who are vegan and who do care about animals to any suggestion that that they personally might make a decision to have fewer children or even no children, their instant fear is that if the people who care about animals and other social justice issues as well don't reproduce, don't have children, and if only people who are out there who aren't listening to this podcast who are having sex instead and reproducing themselves, and those people have regressive views or odd views, if only they have children, and if they end up having loads of children, won't that create a world where there's no one who cares? I mean, when you actually do care, isn't there a fear that you actually need to reproduce and put those ideas out there into your offspring?
Right. Well, if part of the question is, should we be talking about this in front of animal people audience because we don't want to encourage them not to have children? I think the point is, I think what you're really saying is shouldn't we be having this discussion in front of all audiences? Because not that we shouldn't be talking about it, but shouldn't everyone be talking about it? Because you want everyone to consider the issues like, do we want wildlife present for the 4-year-olds that are growing up today? Do we want them to be able? So it might be that you would want everyone to discuss it in order to avoid a situation where only some of the listeners are listening. And secondly, I would say if your point instead was we should be encouraging compassionate animal people to be having children, I think 2 points. One, there would be something inconsistent with the extinction that increase in family size would cause, and our view of animals as rights bearers that should live autonomously. Secondly, you're not going to win a birth race against other political factions in the country. Third would be that I think you don't want one of the model puts forth objective reasons for having children. One impermissible reason to have children would be to try to create political constituents. That would not be advisable. And I think the fourth point would be that there are ways for everyone to get on the same page, so that it's not hopeless that we could have a more national dialogue about best practices when it comes to parenting. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that definitely answered my question. I mean, I might add a few things that of course, we're never sure that our children are going to convey our values. And there are many ways for us to convey our values to children who we haven't actually given birth to. That would be a good idea. But I know that that's probably part of your model, because your model is so focused on community. And so let's get to your model. Tell us what Having Kids is, and describe the Having Kids model.
Sure. Having Kids it's a nonprofit, recently developed in order, quite frankly, to fix a very specific mistake. And the mistake, really made in the middle to late 20th century, involves setting up a model for family planning that isolates parents and essentially treats the decision to have a child as something that is subjective, really a matter of the subjective choice of each person who would want to become a parent. And our mission is to change that one-sided subjective choice model that's focused exclusively on parents to a three-sided holistic model that's focused on parents, future children, and the community. And the simplest way to think about that is that when one is deciding to have a child, the previous model, the old model, it's just the parent in the room. And under this model, the parent, a future child that they would have, and the community would be in the room to try to come up with the best decision possible. And the reasons for the one-sided model and the mistakes that led to it are pretty academic. No need to go into all of that detail. But I think it's common sense to say that when we're thinking about the decision to have a child, we ought to consider the impact that decision has on the future child and on the community. And that's what Having Kids does. It moves us from the old model to the new model. And in that sense, it's a unique organization. But as I said before, one that can unify the animal protection, environmental, and human rights movements around this best practice. And I will just add to your great point, Marianne, to close out the last question, when you had said that we aren't sure that our children will carry forth our values. In fact, Matt Ball, founder of Vegan Outreach, was great to recently share with me a lot of data that supports the notion that our views are really formed in large part by the communities in which we are raised, and not just the household. So it really, that should be taken into consideration when deciding how parenting will impact the views of future generations.
And I definitely want to explore that, but I also want to explore the question of what you mean by in the room. Are you suggesting that the decision on whether an individual person or a couple are going to have a child should be in the hands of more than that individual or couple, or that they should take into account other interests when they're making that decision?
Really the latter. They should take into account others when making that decision. And I'll give you an analogy. You decide, Marianne, you have the right to speak freely. You have and you exercise that right. But you do so today with some limitations that you probably accept as reasonable, because the behavior of speaking has been fleshed out in terms of its nuances and limitations, its rights and its wrongs. And so you wouldn't on this show outrightly defame people. You probably wouldn't develop, pornographic narratives that would violate some FCC rules. You might not incite violence. All of these things.
Why was that one a might? No pornography, but before. Violence maybe.
Well, yeah, animal rights people are notorious. I'm joking. So you sense those limitations, but because of the mistake in the modeling, a lot of people don't sense those limitations that also exist for the decision to have children. Just like the decision to speak and speak freely, there is also an impact that the decision to have children has on others. I mean, quite frankly, it has a significant impact on the child that's born, right? And on the community. We wouldn't be recognizing anthropogenic climate change as perhaps the greatest threat to people alive today if there was no anthropogenic and there were no humans. And so the decision to enlarge the Anthropocene, to enlarge humanity's footprint on the earth is a public decision. And so it is a matter of parents deciding, but with a model like the Having Kids model that moves them away from subjective choice to objective interest, the decision becomes more nuanced. And honestly, this evolution we hope will happen in our thinking about having kids isn't unlike the evolution that happened in our thinking about free speech, in seeing that it's just a little more complex than choosing to say whatever we wish to say.
How can people who care about animals and other issues but don't have children, like me, work toward a successful future that incorporates children and do create this community that supports parents, supports children in changing the world?
Well, I think what we would advocate is to support any model, and it doesn't have to be the Having Kids model, but any model of family planning that promotes shifting resources and incentives to improve the conditions in which children enter the world. I mean, that's the buzzword. So if you're thinking about eating a plant-based diet, you won't eat any, or you won't procure any products derived from animals, either their themselves or their activities. That's the sort of phrase that you focus on. You won't have you'll have plant-based consumption. Here, we're talking about thinking about family planning as finding some way to shift a resource or an incentive that would improve the conditions in which a child enters the world. So, for example, a group of sort of vegans are sitting around with a group of family members at, let's say, Thanksgiving, and of course they're debating whether there ought to be a turkey or a tofurkey on the table. Something you could do, and any animal advocate could do, is to also broach the conversation about family planning and suggest that where there's an opportunity to shift resources to improve the conditions in which a child enters the world, that's a policy we could all agree on. So, for example, in the United States, everyone gets a child tax credit for each child they have of roughly $1,000 per child. What if you took those credits for families making over $200,000 a year and you cut them off after the first child? and you took those savings and you invested in neonatal and Head Start programs that were pegged to some sort of family planning incentive, like you had to contribute a certain amount to a health savings plan in order to trigger some benefit. So that is something you could do. You could promote, in talking to other people, promote the idea that a good way to think about family planning, given the state of the world today, is to agree that we work on shifting resources that would create large families to instead incentivize family planning to give kids a better start in life. I think that dialogue, quite frankly, is more acceptable to most people than even changing to a plant-based diet. And secondly, would have, for the reasons that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, would have a tremendous impact on the lives of animals. And so the one step you could take is by promoting that sort of thinking about having kids.
So it's really, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to do this on Thanksgiving because Thanksgiving is a big enough problem. But I mean, I love the idea of having this conversation, but what you're suggesting really is that we don't approach it from, there are too many people in the world, why are you having a kid, to how best can we construct the world that each child is best served. Am I right?
That's right. I mean, and this is why it's so silly that this debate has become so controversial and taboo, quite frankly, because the whole point of having a list of human rights, which then that list does include the right to found a family, it's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but the whole point is that that list reflects objective shared values that we all have. And the model doesn't say that we shouldn't value having children. We should. But we need to do so in a way that's objective. And I think the point is we probably could value having smaller families, so people might have fewer children and agree that that's a good thing, and that the resources that would have then gone in to create larger families or more children are in fact used to give every child at least a fairer start in life. So we shift the taxes in the way that I talked about, because I think people will agree that whatever way we choose to plan our families, children deserve some minimum standard in which to enter the world. That standard should be pegged in part to fairness. How are other children entering the world? And thirdly, I think we could all agree that resources that are going into large families, considering the environmental state of affairs and other impacts that large families have, those resources are the ones that should be shifted to give children a better start in life. And I honestly don't think that's a controversial or objectionable proposition when people think about it, and moving towards that model will help animals.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'm not sure I agree it's not controversial, because any conversation around this issue ends up being controversial. But even argument, like I just hear people arguing about public education and acting as if that's a burden on people who don't have children. And it shouldn't, resources given to children should be something that we all expect to share and to participate in enthusiastically. I mean, as long as they're being well spent, that resources given to children, whether it's to help the children who already exist or to reconsider whether your resources are best geared towards having another child. I think it should be a non-controversial topic, even though it's not. I find even when I'm talking about it, that I'm speaking in abstractions, and all of this sounds very, very visionary. How would people who are interested in finding out more about your model and think this is an important issue, how do people implement it in the real world now?
Well, one of the most, this is another reason why it shouldn't be such a taboo or scary subject. One of the most influential ways to influence people's decision making about having kids is by modeling. So you act as a role model for other people, and one way that everyone can get involved, and even animal advocates, is by modeling this behavior of the Having Kids model. And if you go to havingkids.org, you'll see on the homepage families, all of whom, I think at this point, all of whom are animal advocates. They are advocates working in the animal protection movement on a daily basis, fighting for animals. They are also having children, but they are doing so in a way that models a behavior that could be, if adopted widely, would benefit animals. And so one way to do it is simply living the model, as what we call the featured families are doing. Another way you could get involved is by simply advocating for the model. The organization in the next 6 months will be developing a petition, essentially urging treaty bodies within the United Nations and agencies